Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Manifix. So today I wanted to go over my Edgar Markov Vampire Tribal Commander deck. I haven't done this deck tech on the channel yet, so I figured I would just show you guys my paper deck, and so that you guys can see what I play in real life. So first of all, Edgar Markov is a 6 mana 4/4 with first strike and haste. He has an Eminence ability, which is the reason why he is so powerful. Whether he's in the command zone or on the battlefield, whenever we cast another vampire spell, we create a 1/1 black vampire creature token. That is so powerful, and it gets out of hand really quickly. If we do actually cast him, he's got first strike and haste. He's a 4/4, and whenever he attacks, we put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire we control, which again gets out of hand extremely quickly. So this is just an aggro deck where we cast a bunch of little vampires and we beef them all up with Edgar or some other spells that we're going to see a little bit later and just beat our opponent's faces. So let's take a look at the ramp to start. And we've got, obviously, Soul Ring, self-explanatory, Orzhov's Signet, Rakdos Signet. We've got the Talismans as well, Talisman of Indulgence, Hierarchy, and Conviction. We're also running Felwar Stone, being in 3 colors. That's going to help us mana fix a little bit. And then we're also running Charcoal Diamond. The reason for that is because black is easily the most prominent color in this deck, and we end up just needing a lot of it. So if we're going to run any of the tapped color rocks, Charcoal Diamond is the one. And then we also have Warren Power Stone, and then Herald's Horn, which is just a tribal staple. When this enters the battlefield, we choose a creature type, which is going to be vampire. It makes our vampires cost 1 less, and we also get to draw a vampire off the top occasionally when we reveal it with Herald's Horn. So that's pretty nice as well. Now let's take a look at the vampires that we're running here. Legion Lieutenant is a vampire lord, gives our other vampires +1/+1. Pretty solid for 2 mana, 2/2. Vampire Socialite is interesting. So it's a 2/2 with Menace. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, we put a +1/+1 counter on each other vampire we control. So we're usually going to play this after we attack in our post-combat main phase. And then as long as an opponent lost life this turn, each other vampire you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So it does something when it comes down, and it beefs them up while it's on the battlefield as well. So this is huge at 2 mana. Rakish Air. Whenever a vampire you control deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Pretty nice. Captivating Vampire is another vampire lord, but it also allows us to steal our opponent's creatures, which is absolutely disgusting. We just have to tap 5, which is super easy to get to with Edgar's token generating ability. So you're going to find that this is one of the best cards in the deck. Metallic Mimic. So this actually doesn't enter as a vampire, so we don't get the token from casting it, but we do get, what this does is it buffs all of the vampires that enter after we play this. So this comes in as a vampire, and then whenever we play a vampire, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Stromkirk Captain is another vampire lord, 2/2 with first strike. That gives them +1/+1 and first strike. Pretty solid for 3 mana. Drana, Liberator of Malakir, is another thing, another cheap vampire that buffs our other vampires. This has flying and first strike, so when it deals combat damage, it deals first strike damage. So that's going to trigger before everything else attacking does damage. So it puts a +1/+1 counter on every other attacking creature, which means that those +1/+1 counters are going to contribute to the damage done in that combat step, which is really nice. Indulgent Aristocrat. So, like I said, this is primarily an aggro deck, but it does have some Aristocrats-esque elements, and this is one of those. So it's a 1/1 with lifelink for 1, and then we can pay 2 and sacrifice a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire we control. So we can just sack a token to this and generate tons of counters. I mean, this is going to substantially increase the amount of damage that we deal at the cost of getting rid of a 1/1 token, so that's really not a big deal at all. Not to mention it's a sack outlet just like Viscera Seer is, so when we sacrifice a creature, we can sacrifice a creature to Viscera Seer to scry one. It's just really, really solid value at 1 mana, and you'll see why in things like Cordial Vampire, why we want those sack outlets. So Cordial Vampire is a 2 mana 1/1, and whenever Cordial Vampire or another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire we control. Again, buffing everything on the battlefield. Whenever anything dies, that's another creature. So it doesn't even have to be one that we control. But like I said, with things like Viscera Seer, we can kind of force that to trigger. And again, you can see why I mentioned before how important black is, because, I mean, this is very much a black deck, even though it's in Mardu colors. Bloodline Keeper. So this is also one of the best cards in the deck. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that today, but so we can tap this to put a 2/2 black vampire creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Really what we're going to be doing, hopefully the turn this comes down, is activating the second ability by paying 1 black. We can only do it if we have 5 or more vampires, but when we transform it, it becomes Lord of Lineage. It's a 5/5 with flying that gives all of our vampires +2/+2. And then it also has that tap ability, but this massively increases the amount of damage that we deal. And it's one that you'll want to tutor for early, or you'll just be happy to see in your opening hand. Vampire Nocturnus is another great one. So with this one, we play with the top card of our library revealed, and then as long as that top card is black, again, we're running lots of black, other vampire creatures you control get +2/+1 and have flying. So this is going to it's going to help you to get that damage through, in addition to adding to the total amount of damage that you can deal every turn. So this card is going to win you some games as well. So is Necropolis Regent. My goodness, this is another bomb. 6/5 with flying. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So we swing in with a bunch of 2/2s. They all get 2 +1/+1 counters. And then next turn, we've got 4/4s, and they're swinging in. This just gets nasty if left unchecked. Patron of the Vein. So this is a 4/4 with flying for 6. When it enters the battlefield, we destroy target creature an opponent controls. So a little bit of target removal. And then whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, exile it, and then we put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. There's that phrasing again. +1/+1 counter on each vampire we control. Those effects are extremely powerful. So this is removal, this is creature buff, all in one vampire, which is really, really solid. So now we're moving on to the card draw here. So I'll just grab a few more of these here. All right, so Falkenrath Pitfighter. This is a 1 mana 2/1 vampire, so solid already. And then we can pay 2, discard a card, and sacrifice a vampire to draw 2 cards. So again, another sack outlet and a card draw engine in a 1 mana vampire. That is really, really good value. Dusk Legion Zealot is just a 2 mana 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, we draw a card and lose 1 life. It is also a vampire. Pretty solid there. Florian Voldaren Scion. So this is a 3 mana 3/3 with first strike. It's a vampire, of course. And then at the beginning of our post-combat main phase, we look at the top X cards, where X is the total amount of life our opponents lost this turn. Hopefully a lot, probably a lot. We get to take one of those and exile it, and then we can play that card this turn. So it's really good card draw and card selection on another cheap vampire. Champion of Dusk is a 5 mana 4/4. This is again a vampire. When it enters the battlefield, we draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of vampires we control. So hopefully we'll play this like early to mid game, so that we have like, I don't know, maybe 6 vampires and then draw 6 cards, lose 6 life is not too bad. If we have like 20, then it's like, okay, yikes, maybe we don't want to play this, but still, this can put a ton of cards in your hand, and it's just a really solid option for that. Forerunner of the Legion. This is a vampire tutor on a vampire. When it enters the battlefield, we search our library for a vampire card, reveal it, shuffle our library, and put that card on top. It also has a static ability on the bottom. Whenever another vampire enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Pretty nice there. Sanctum Seeker. So this is going to be dealing tons of damage to our opponents because whenever a vampire we control attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. That triggers for each vampire we're attacking with. So this, I mean, if we have 10 vampires, all of our opponents, not just the one we're attacking, all of our opponents are going to lose 10 life and we're going to gain 10 life. It's pretty nuts. Malakir Blood Witch. So this is another crazy one. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses life equal to the number of vampires you control. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. This can potentially win us the game if we have enough vampires to kill everybody. Null Priest of Oblivion. So this one is nice because it gives you an option. You can pay the kicker or you can just pay 2 for a 2/1 with Menace and Lifelink. That's still pretty good value, but if we want to pay 4 extra, then when this enters, we get to return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Pretty solid. This one is similar as well, so 5 mana, 3/2 with lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, we return a vampire or wizard. We're going to choose vampire. Creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Drana, the Last Blood Chief. So it's a 4/4 with flying. And when it attacks, defending player chooses a non-legendary creature card in your graveyard. You return that card to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. So our opponent is choosing. It's not as good as those other two, but still every time it attacks, it does that. So that's pretty solid. Then we have Bloodlord of Vazgoth. This is just a really solid vampire for 5 mana. It's a 3/3 with flying, but it has Bloodthirst 3. So if an opponent was dealt damage this turn, then it enters with 3 +1/+1 counters, so it would be a 6/6. And then whenever we cast a vampire creature, it gains Bloodthirst 3. So our vampires are going to be coming down with 3 +1/+1 counters on them, adding to our damage total, which is really nice. Nurkana Revenant. So this one I'm considering taking out, actually, but whenever you tap a swamp for mana, add an additional black. The problem is we just don't run a ton of swamps. I mean, it is the most common basic land in this deck, but still, this is a 3-color deck ultimately, so we don't have a ton of swamps. Still, when we pay 1 black, we can buff it, +1/+1 until end of turn, which is pretty nice. Olivia Voldaren, of course, we have to have Olivia in this deck. 3/3 with flying. Basically, what she does, you pay 2 mana to deal a damage to a creature and put a +1/+1 counter on her, and it becomes a vampire until end of turn, and then you can pay 5 mana to gain control. So you're essentially stealing your opponent's creatures, which is pretty nasty. Maverin Fane Dusk Apostle is also a vampire, 3 mana 2/2. Whenever 1 or more non-token vampires you control attack, create a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. So this is just going to create us a 1/1 lifelink vampire every turn, so that's pretty nice. And then we have Keru Mind Eater. So whenever Keru Mind Eater deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles a card from his or hand face down, and then you can look at and play those cards. So this is kind of a form of card draw, and a 3 mana 1/3 with Menace. That's a vampire. Pretty solid there. So I lied. I was saying we were getting into card draw. We were just getting into all the vampires here, which is exactly what those are. Now we're going to talk about card draw, I believe, here in this next stack. So, yep, so we've got Vanquisher's Banner here. When it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. This is obviously a staple for any tribal deck. We're going to choose vampires. Vampires are going to get +1/+1, and then whenever we cast a vampire, we're going to draw a card. So, pretty solid there. Night's Whisper. This is just a straight-up sorcery that draws us 2 cards. Phyrexian Arena, again, major black staple. At the beginning of our upkeep, we draw a card and we lose 1 life. And Necropotence, again, same thing. This is just going to let us draw as many cards as we want, essentially, as long as we're okay with discarding them to exile. But it's good for finding the key cards that we need to win the game or get us out of a sticky situation, what have you. Skull Clamp. So this is, again, where the aristocrats type things come in. When we attach this to a creature, it gets +1, -1, and whenever that equipped creature dies, we draw 2 cards. So all those 1/1s that we're creating with Edgar, we're going to be able to clamp those and draw a bunch of cards, which is really, really nice. Liliana Dreadhorde General. So this says whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. So obviously we're going to have a bunch of tokens. We're going to be attacking with things. People are going to want to block that stuff, and when they block and kill it, we get to draw cards. We also have those sack outlets we talked about earlier. That's going to feed into this too. The +1, we make a 2/2 zombie token. -4, each player sacrifices 2 creatures. And that -9, which probably we'll never get to, maybe, who knows. Each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. That's a nasty ultimate if we ever do get there. All right, let's talk about a few of the tutors here now. So Vampiric Tutor, obvious staple. Search for any card, put it on top. Enlightened Tutor, search for an artifact or enchantment, put it on top. Demonic Tutor, search for any card, put it into our hand. Diabolic Intent, again with these aristocrat types effects, the fact that we have a bunch of tokens, sacrificing a creature is really no big deal, and from there it's just a Diabolic Tutor. Demonic Tutor, sorry. Swords to Plowshares. So again, a lot of these are staples that we're running here. 1 mana, exile target creature, instant speed, nothing beats that. Vindicate, so for 3 mana, destroy target permanent. It's sorcery speed, so not as good as Anguish Unmaking, but still pretty solid. Anguish Unmaking, instant speed, 3 mana, exile target non-land permanent, you lose 3 life. Then Return to Dust. If we cast this during our main phase, we get to exile 2 artifacts or enchantments, otherwise it's just 1 at instant speed. Vandal Blast, so this is really, really good against any decks that run a bunch of artifacts because, well, for 1 mana at sorcery speed, we can destroy 1 artifact we don't control, but we can destroy all artifacts we don't control if we pay that overload cost, which is nuts. New Blood, so this is an interesting card. It's a sorcery, and we do have to tap a vampire we control in addition to paying the 4 mana for this card. But what it does is we just gain control of a creature, and we make that creature a vampire. So not only are we stealing something from an opponent, but we're also making it better for us because it's going to become a vampire, and it's going to get all those buffs that all of our vampires are always getting. Merciless Eviction. So we do have this 1 board wipe in here. Obviously, we don't want to run a ton because our deck just revolves around pumping out creatures as fast as possible, and we'll rarely ever want to wipe the board. But the nice thing about this one is it gives us the option to wipe out other things other than creatures if we want to. Like if there's some really nasty enchantments out there that we want to get rid of, we can do that. Planeswalkers and artifacts are also an option. Creatures, if we're really in a bind, I mean, it doesn't happen often in this deck, but it's possible. Then we have Teferi's Protection. Nothing beats this card as far as like you lose the game. Actually, just kidding. No, you don't, because you have Teferi's Protection in your hand. I mean, it's just a really, really solid card. Shared Animosity. This is this is another one of the best cards in the deck type cards. This thing is going to massively increase our damage output because each of our vampires is going to get +1/+0 for each other vampire we control that's also attacking. I probably explained that horribly, but basically if we have 5 vampires attacking, each of those vampires is going to get +4/+0 because there's 4 other ones attacking with it that share creature type. So, I mean, when this comes down, somebody's dying, if not everybody, because this thing is just absolutely nuts. Anointed Procession, this is kind of self-explanatory if you don't know what this card does. It doubles your token output. Why would you not want to have that in a deck like this? Ashnod's Altar, one of those sack outlets, gives us mana. Really, really solid card. Dictate of Erebos, so here's again where the aristocrats type thing comes in. If we're sacrificing our tokens with this on the battlefield, our opponents are going to be they're going to be forced to sacrifice their own creatures. Same thing with Grave Pact. So just kind of getting rid of our creatures to getting rid of our little creatures to get rid of more threatening things. Sadistic Hypnotist. So this is a really interesting card. What we can do with this is we can sacrifice all those little 1/1 tokens to have people discard cards from their hand. So it's 2 per creature that we sacrifice. Now we can only do this as a sorcery, which is a little bit of a setback, but still really, really powerful card. I mean, if we have a bunch of tokens out there, we can just basically make all of our opponents dump their hands, which is really, really cruel, but fun. All right, so then let's just talk about the utility lands here real quick. Urborg, again, like I said, we're running tons of black. We got lots and lots of black pips on our cards, if you want to call them that. Whatever you call them, black mana symbols in our mana cost. So we need all the swamps we can get, and that's going to help us get there. Path of Ancestry, basically every time we cast a creature, we're going to scry one, because all of our creatures are vampires, except for a couple. Sajiri Shelter, so this is going to save a creature from target removal, basically, is why it's here. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice. Or if we have this in our opening hand, or we just decide we don't need it, we can play it as a tapped land. So one of those modal double-faced lands. Same thing with Ondu Inversion. This is another board wipe, but like I said, we don't really need board wipes. But if we decide, okay, yeah, we really don't need this, well, again, taps for white. So, and then Westvale Abbey, this one, I actually have not ever activated that. And so I'm wondering if it probably just shouldn't be in here. But basically what this does is you can sacrifice 5 creatures and transform it, and it becomes this big nasty demon thing. But what I find most of the time is that having those 5 creatures, because of all the buffs that they're getting and everything, it deals more damage than this 9/7 flying lifelink indestructible haste anyways. So why sacrifice those creatures to basically ultimately get less damage out of it? Doesn't make any sense. All right, so then Cavern of Souls. So, I mean, this is obvious. We're going to put this down, call Vampire, and then whenever we use the second ability to cast a Vampire, it's uncounterable. So, yeah, that's it. Like I said, you're just pumping out a bunch of Vampires and Vampire tokens, and then oftentimes in like turn 4 or 5, you'll get this guy out, swing with him right away, and you're at like 20 plus damage already, like by turn 4 or 5, because of how fast this deck is. So it's a blast to play. I know Edgar is really expensive right now. Hopefully, I'm hoping that they reprint him in Commander Masters, because I know they're reprinting the Ur-Dragon, so it would make sense because he's from the same Commander year, I believe. So anyways, that's it, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. As always, thanks for getting your fix with me today. Stay safe out there. Peace out, guys.